Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Today we're taking a look at a setting whose books I've been reading a bit since they started coming out in January. This is Brent Evans' Land and Sea. The books in question are the first trilogy of an ongoing series related to this setting. The first one came out on January 12th. It was Splashdown. Second, Riptides. And the third one, as of March 16th, Storm Surge. This one I got right here on my Kindle here. These were all written by New York Times best-selling author Blaine Pardoe, and if that name and the aforementioned Brent Evans sound familiar, it's probably because you run in the same kind of fandom circles I do, and you know your Battletech. Brent Evans is the current senior art director over at Callous Games Lab. He's in charge of, the art design for pretty much everything they do there, from Shadowrun to Battletech. In fact, he was the line director for Battletech from 2017 to 2019. Which, you can probably give him at least some credit for the current resurgence of the IP in modern times. And of course, Blaine Pardoe. I mean, come on, the guy's written like 20 or so novels in the Battletech setting. So that plus, a number of source books as well for the Battletech game as well. So yeah, the guy knows his big stompy robots. And aside from that, he's also written a whole bunch of novels, military history, nonfiction, political thrillers, true crime books. The guy knows how to wield a pen, is all I'm saying, right? So in 2019, these guys founded a company called Creative Juggernaut, Brent Evans, and bringing Mr. Pardoe on that, to create their own franchise and IP called Land and Sea. This one is military sci-fi, hard sci-fi kind of thing, alien invasion setting, which they're planning on using for their own war game, a tabletop kind of thing, as well as the aforementioned novels that I just talked about, and possibly also some digital offerings too. I'm hoping they can do some video games. That would be pretty cool with that. So what is Land and Sea really? It takes place in 2039, so not too far away from the current time period, during which time, in between now and then, there's been some political kerfuffles. There was a war between the Americans and Russians, not necessarily resulting from the current snafu in Eastern Europe, hopefully, but, I don't think they expected that to come true when they were writing this. Suffice to say, things got really, really bad. The Alaska was invaded. There was a massive cyber attack on the U.S. Infrastructure and internet. Things got really, really nasty for a while. This has resulted now that the war's over, a large population of veterans from this conflict, and a world that is recovering from a war and is now more on a peacetime kind of vibe. But it's still resulted in a bit of a watchfulness on the part of their intelligence agencies and the development of new technology stemming from that war, specifically the Asher rigs, the augmented, soft, hard, unconventional combat rigs. These are the mechs of this particular setting, for those of you who came in from the Battletech side of things and really want to see those things discussed. They're not quite battle mechs, if that makes any sense. There's more closer along to the lines of, advanced powered armor. They're about 3 to 4 meters tall. It's the kind of thing where the pilot sitting in the cockpit has their legs into the thighs of the machine, so to speak, and they're, following their movements. Badass was seriously powerful, though, and treated with a great deal of realistic military and technical know-how research. One thing I would say about this whole setting is that it does feel very, very grounded. Nothing feels over the top. There's nothing really... One of the ad copy that I read for this series, for the first book, was Tom Clancy meets The Expanse. And I can see where they went with that, because it definitely has a techno-thriller feel to it, along with the hard SF, dealing with strange alien kind of incursion that The Expanse has, both in the show and the books. However, I will say I would add one other thing to this description, and that's it's Tom Clancy meets The Expanse meets XCOM Terror from the Deep. Because A, the alien invasion is coming from the oceans, as we'll go in when I start discussing the story and stuff. And B, you get that same kind of thing that you get from the XCOM games about humanity dealing with this alien invasion and doing their research, researching their enemy, learning from their enemy, and developing countermeasures as they go on that then get used during the war. That feel you get in XCOM when you start, researching your enemy's weapons and turning them against them. Yeah, this series really has that in spades, and I like that a lot. So like I said, it's an alien invasion story. Basically, the books are divided, all of the 3 of them are divided in 2 general sections. One are the cycles there's usually about 5 cycles spread out throughout each book, which are a series of vignettes that depict events occurring around the world to various people, civilians, military, and all sorts of things, and how they're dealing with the situation. At the first book, Splashdown, there's a gradual build-up. The first couple of these vignettes are basically just, maybe someone discovering, oh, there's this weird, what the heck is this? This is just a strange crab or something. It's, oh, shit! And, things go a little bit close encounters of the bad kind at that point. Or it's, someone in an oil rig who's discovering that something's been messing around with the struts on his rig, and he's like wondering what the hell could do this. And it's that gradual build-up. And as you go on, the further you go on, the more it's like, okay, we're in the middle of a battle somewhere in Japan or Germany or, Spain or Russia or somewhere else across the world or in the United States. And the aliens are coming, and oh God, we're dealing with this. And oh no, there's this whole new thing coming. And it's just, often these vignettes serve not just to create a mood and to show events outside of the main character's perspectives, but also to introduce elements that won't necessarily show up until a couple of chapters in, which is a nice way of doing things. The other ones, of course, are the main chapters, each one focusing on a particular viewpoint character. There's a number of them, both civilians, military, media, business, researchers and scientists and stuff like that. Each one bringing their own perspective to things, but also seeing the war from a different place and a different, context. I will say there's sometimes a bit of repetition in terms of elements, because something new that happens will get explored from different perspectives that way. But it does mean that you get these like, oh no, this thing just happened for the first time a couple of times, sometimes, especially in the second book, I found. That doesn't happen quite as much in the third one. But so that can be, like, okay, I've seen the description of this thing before. I know what I'm looking at, but the character doesn't, so it needs to be, restated. That's about the only negative I can think of in this particular formatting, the way it works. Other than that, you get a lot of cool characters. I can't say I disliked any of the POV characters that I've encountered so far. I do have a couple of favorites. There's a corporal, first private, then corporal Reed Porter, who's a United States Marine stationed in Guam when the base there gets attacked early on in Splashdown. And you see his story. Him and another character named Cassidy Chen, Cece to our friends. She's just a 16-year-old living in LA. She and him have the most change to their characters as they go along. He gets, swept us along in the events of, the attack on Guam, and is basically trying to live up to everyone's perception of him because of his actions during that battle that, got publicized rather extensively. And he goes on throughout there trying to live up to both his expectation, because he started out as a, frankly, rather piss-poor Marine in his own description. But he got help from others who didn't necessarily make it out of the battle there. And now he's got that survivor's guilt really pushing him to try and be everything that they thought he could be. And he gets into some really, really, really tough battles throughout these 3 books, especially going into the second and third one. Cassie Chen, as I mentioned, she's just a regular girl trying to survive as, Los Angeles gets wrecked throughout the series. And she starts out just, regular spoiled brat, basically, only forced... That's the way that, wars always are for people. It forces you to grow up real fast, for better or for worse. And the person she is at the end of the third book is completely different from the person she was at the start and of the first one. And that is something I like to see in these characters. There are other ones who don't change quite so much, but basically, that have that core to themselves that they stay true to throughout the entire thing. And those ones I like a lot. There's, I think my favorite among those is probably a guy named Adam Kane, who's in his 50s. He's an Army veteran. He should be probably a colonel at this point, but he keeps getting bumped down to sergeant because he keeps mouthing off to his superior officers whenever he doesn't like them. He is an astropilot, but he's not just an astropilot. He is a damn good one, to the point where he qualified for multiple rigs. He pilots a Rhino during the second book, and he's part of some absolutely massive battles. He's part of the Battle of the Sea of the Pentagon in that one. And that is just a meat grinder of a fight. That is just great. And then, later on, the third one, he gets a new third generation Asher, Grizzly, it's referred to. That's one of the things I like. The technology, you see not just, new stuff getting integrated into the, weapon systems that their people are developing for the war against these aliens, but you also get to see how difficult it is to develop it. There's often discussions of like, okay, we need to, especially once you get to like the people developing new suits at DARPA and stuff like that, you get to see, okay, we need to develop this based on this kind of footage we have of these aliens, what we know about them. What do we have? What's going to be the requirements? Do we have enough, power generation devices for this? Are we going to have to develop a whole new kind of fuel cell to make this work? You get to see a bit the procedural nitty-gritty that goes into this kind of high-pressure, rapid deployment research of, military gear that goes into this. And you get to see also the strain and the stress that it puts on these characters. They're really, you can see them like this. You just in the physical descriptions, like you see characters described one way in the first book when things are still going well. Even by the second book, you can already there's described with bags under their eyes from just the lack of sleep and the stress of trying to figure out how to save the world from the possible extinction of humanity at this point. So you really do get that. Plus, there's the strain it puts on the relationships that people have. Adam Kane didn't exactly have the best relationship starting out with his ex-wife and daughter. So, now that things have gotten this hairy, it's not exactly much better. And I will say this about this: the books aren't afraid to take turns that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Like characters die that you would probably in another kind of story would probably be reunited with others. That their loved ones, stuff like that. But here it's just like, no, not gonna happen. There's other characters who do terrible things, or for good reasons, or good things for terrible reasons. Not all the humans in this story are the good guys, to say the least, or at the very least, there's some shades of gray for many people. Others are just as usual, humanity can be its own worst enemy. There's definitely a couple of people who are trying to profit from the whole like chaos and the possibilities of this war. And of course, then you have the aliens who are absolutely vicious in their assault on humanity. I mean, these guys have never even heard of the Geneva Convention, and if they did, they wouldn't give a damn. The weapons they use are utterly horrific. We're talking sonic cannons that can knock down buildings, acid sprayers that melt through steel and flesh like there's nothing there. By the end of the third one, there's gamma ray weapons that do horrific radiation burns. That's just nasty as hell. I mean, one of the initial sorties involves these giant snails with like clam-shaped shells that come onto the beaches. And I won't spoil exactly what happens when those things open up, but when they do, you better run like hell or you're dead in the most horrible way possible. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah. I mean, gee, and that's not to say also what they do to their POWs. I mean, ooh boy. I mean, Joseph Mengele would be, fainting at the sight of it. That's saying something. You really get the feeling, and this is expressed through the characters as well, that these aliens aren't just here to kill us all. They want something, and we have no idea what. They act in an intelligent way, but it's in a way that's brought about by an alien mentality and an alien way of doing things, and that is very well explored in the book. The way they move, the way they do things, the way they organize their troops. And they also are adapting to us. They spent 5 years since their stealth arrival on Earth before coming out, so they've studied us. And it's really cool the way that not only are we learning from them and adapting our technologies and coming up with new ways of fighting them to take the fight to them underwater, which is something that humanity's never had to do outside of submarines. But also, they're doing the same thing to us. They have, their equivalent to the Asher suits, the mini mechs, are these hulking black-skinned humanoid creatures that look like a cross between. Well, they kind of look like if a shark suddenly decided to walk on 2 legs, and these things are horrifically destructive melee fighters. And they just rush in. Most bullets just bounce right off. And they're wearing their skin is built in. It's like the equivalent of a pressure suit to keep the massive pressures from the deep ocean so that they can actually walk around on land. So there's really some thought that's gone into not just how realistic they would be for the human side of things, but also from the alien side of things. These creatures are genetically engineered for specific roles. I almost get the feeling that we haven't even seen the aliens yet, because maybe we're just dealing with their tools, their walking bioweapons that they're just unleashing, and maybe the real intelligence hasn't even shown up yet in the pages. So that's one thought I've had. But yeah, they constantly are coming up with new things. Throughout the books, new creatures get introduced, new variations, new weapons that are almost either grown or grafted onto the enemy's limbs that they use. It's just like, it's familiar in the sense that the creatures themselves, you can tell kind of what they look like immediately. Like, this thing looks like a crab with, a bit more of a humanoid looking, like centaur-like arrangement, so I can fire things out. Another thing looks closer to like a cross between a fish turtle like thing that they're using as APCs that can jump around and stuff like that on hugely powerful limbs. And there's an enemy a monster that got introduced in the third book that when it got shown for the first time, I'm like, oh hell, holy shit, okay, I wasn't expecting that, but I'm glad it happened. People know what I'm talking about when they read Storm Surge. And yeah, you get that, and you get not just a lot of variety too. You get infantry combat, you get mech combat, submarines, there's a surface navy, all this stuff, land battles. You get people, the various groups of militia that sprout out in the destroyed cities to try and protect their homes. Those are really important characters. The 5th California militia, Colton's Cutthroats, they're referred to by the third book. Those are really, really cool. That guy, particular character, Antonio, he's a veteran of the Alaskan Wars, suffering from PTSD and stuff like that from there, and finds himself with a new purpose, defending his home, which is just this wrecked part of LA that was never rebuilt after the Russians, fired missiles on the West Coast back during the previous war. Who finds his inner soldier again, who finds, a purpose that he was missing throughout this whole thing, and, really steps into his own and, takes care of his community, brings everybody together. And you get to see a bit of that, humanity coming together, as well as other, humans that are just, in it for themselves and, trying to profit off of this mess. There's, some self-serving media types who's just there for the ratings. And even when she does, really good things, it's purely for her own benefit. And there's another guy who is basically he's basically, your kind of, high-tech tech mogul, super billionaire type with a serious dose of Lex Luthor thrown in there. Let's just say that. And you get all these people coming together, trying to find the solutions, fighting this war in their own way, whether it's from gathering analyzing the intelligence on the enemy to just, socking in the face with it before firing a chain gun with the other arm. It's just great stuff. The first book is very much a lot of build-up and get to that actual, big first fight on Guam. And you get a little bit of sparse bits of combat in there, but mostly it's like training missions with the Marines, with a Corporal Natalia Falto, who's, our main point of view character at that point. And in those cases, the mechs and crazes are like, Russian mechs and stuff like that are being used for training purposes by their sergeant. And you eventually get his Lion Class Asher in the big fight at the end there. And then, when you get to the second book, things are really on a war footing. And then you get to the third one, and they're introducing new stuff, and there's, this whole sequence where they're located one of the aliens' bases, and they're bringing the fight to them, and it is just, by the time you got into that, with, all the stuff that's happened in the meantime, that you really feel like, yeah, go for it, humanity, fuck yeah! You really get that feeling to it. But even then, you still know that the war isn't anywhere close to over. This is just like the first proper counterattack that humanity's finally been able to do after all this time. And I do. By the end of the third one, I was looking forward to seeing what comes next, whether it be, in a gaming format or for more fiction. There's another book called Flotsam of War that's going to be coming out relatively soon. That's going to be more like individual stories during the events of these three books. And then there's going to be another follow-up book. Blaine, you've been busy on this one. Like, seriously, don't wear yourself out. I want you to be writing these things for quite some time, because this is a setting I like a lot. And I'd like to see, I'm looking forward to seeing what else the aliens can throw at us. What else that we can throw at them. All the different technologies, all the different tactics, all the different creatures. Land and Sea, Brent Evans' Land and Sea, for the full title, is well worth looking into and keeping an eye on. The books themselves are extremely well written. Blaine Pardoe is a great writer. Let's face facts. I mean, he's got experience in this particular genre of military sci-fi, and the guy knows this is a setting that he and Brent and his team are creating from scratch here. So they're really, really digging into this without having to, deal with prior canon or anything like that. They're coming up with this stuff themselves, and I think it shows in the kind of enthusiasm you see in the writing, the quality of it, if that makes any sense. This is very much their baby, and it shows. You can show the dedication to it. So yeah, the 3 books so far: Splashdown, Riptides, Storm Surge. You can find them on Amazon or from the publisher. That is Wargate Books. You can look at that on Creative Juggernaut. I am hoping to see great things from this setting, and I know I'm going to be seeing some more great books from this. I'm looking forward to reading them, and I look forward to also bringing more videos to all of you. So keep an eye on the channel, subscribe if you want to, and check out the socials for anything else. Until next time, I wish you a good evening, and bye-bye.